For over 2,000 years, one story has haunted the edge of our maps, a story of a magnificent island empire, impossibly rich and powerful, that vanished beneath the waves in a single catastrophic day. This is the legend of Atlantis. But what if it's more than just a legend? The man who gave us the tale, the philosopher Plato, described it in incredible detail. So, was he just crafting a cautionary fable about the arrogance of an empire? Or was he preserving the memory of a real place, a real disaster? We'll investigate the clues, from a volcanic island with a dark secret to strange circular patterns in the earth, visible only from space, to finally ask, what really happened to the lost city of Atlantis? The original story, Plato's legend. Everything we think we know about Atlantis, every book, every movie, every wild theory, all starts with one guy, the ancient Greek philosopher, Plato. Around 360 BCE, he wrote two dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, and in them he laid out the first and only primary account of this lost civilization. According to Plato, the story wasn't even his. He claimed it was passed down to him from the great Athenian leader Solon, who supposedly learned it from Egyptian priests decades earlier. And those priests, Plato said, had records of something that happened 9,000 years before their time. Plato paints a wild picture. Atlantis was a massive island empire, located just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a vast kingdom, a paradise gifted by Poseidon, the god of the sea. He supposedly built a home for his mortal love, Cleito, on a hill, and then surrounded it with 5 concentric rings of land and water, connected by enormous canals that ships could sail through, right into the heart of the city. The city itself was a masterpiece of engineering and wealth. The soil was rich, the wildlife was exotic, and the buildings were extravagant. Walls were coated in shimmering metals, bronze, tin, and a mysterious, fiery, glowing metal called orichalcum, said to be second only to gold. They had huge temples, public baths, and a harbour buzzing with merchant ships from all over the world. At the very centre stood a temple to Poseidon, covered in silver with golden spires. For generations, the people of Atlantis were noble and good, ruled by kings descended from Poseidon himself. They controlled their island, other islands, and even parts of Africa and Europe. But as the centuries passed, Plato says their divine blood thinned, and their human nature took over. Greed and an endless lust for power replaced virtue. This corruption drove them to try and conquer the world. The mighty Atlantean navy swept across the sea, enslaving lands as far as Italy and Egypt. They finally set their sights on Athens, hoping to enslave the rest of Europe and Asia. But according to Plato, a smaller, more virtuous prehistoric Athens stood in their way. In a heroic battle, the Athenians fought them off and freed the lands Atlantis had conquered. And then, the gods passed their judgment. In one terrifying day and night of violent earthquakes and floods, the island of Atlantis was ripped apart and swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever. It left behind, Plato claimed, a shoal of impassable mud, blocking anyone from ever sailing into that part of the Atlantic again. It's a fantastic story. But did Plato ever mean for us to take it as history? The cautionary tale, a philosopher's fable. For most classical scholars and archaeologists, the answer is a firm no. The academic consensus is that Atlantis is a sophisticated philosophical allegory, a story Plato made up to prove a point. He was a philosopher, not a historian, and he often used myths to explain big ideas about politics, justice, and how societies fall apart. In fact, his own student, the famous philosopher Aristotle, was one of the first to argue that Plato simply invented the whole thing to teach a lesson. When you look at it that way, the story makes perfect sense. It's a cautionary tale about pride and imperial ambition. Atlantis, with all its power, wealth, and eventual corruption, is the ultimate villain. It's the polar opposite of the city it attacks, an idealized ancient Athens that represents Plato's vision of a perfect, just society. The story is a battle of ideas, the humble, moral state versus the greedy, powerful empire. Athens wins because of its character. Atlantis is destroyed because of its hubris. There are other clues pointing to fiction. That timeline is a big red flag. Setting the story 9,000 years in the past put it so deep in the mists of time that nobody could possibly check his facts. On top of that, his description of a powerful, organized Athenian state existing so long ago is totally anachronistic. A city like Athens wouldn't exist for thousands of years. Many scholars think Plato was inspired by more recent events, like the devastating Peloponnesian War, where Athens' own imperial greed led to its downfall. The destruction of Atlantis might also have been inspired by real disasters, like the city of Helike, which was wiped out by an earthquake and tsunami in 373 BCE, just a few years before Plato wrote his story. For centuries, this was pretty much the final word. Atlantis was a myth, but in the 19th century, that started to change when people began to ask a tantalizing question. What if Plato wasn't just telling a story? What if he was preserving the memory of something real? The investigation begins, the Minoan connection. If Atlantis was real, but the story got twisted over time, maybe its true location wasn't in the Atlantic at all, but much closer to home. This question leads us to the most popular and scientifically plausible theory for a real-world Atlantis, the Minoan civilization. Flourishing on the island of Crete during the Bronze Age, the Minoans were Europe's first great civilization. They were incredible artists, traders, and engineers. Their palaces, like the famous one at Knossos, were massive mazes with hundreds of rooms, bright paintings, and even advanced plumbing. They dominated the sea, trading with Egypt and the Near East and projecting their power across the Mediterranean. Sound familiar? The parallels to Plato's Atlantis are pretty striking. It's a powerful island civilization with a massive maritime influence. Plato mentioned the Atlanteans had rituals involving bulls. Bull leaping and bull imagery were central to Minoan culture. And to the later Greeks, the Minoans were a mysterious, non-Greek people, which fits the description. But the most chilling connection is how their civilization collapsed. Around 1600 BCE, on the nearby island of Thera, now called Santorini, a catastrophic event took place. Thera was home to a bustling Minoan settlement called Akrotiri, but it was also a massive volcano, and it erupted with a force estimated to be 100 times more powerful than the eruption at Pompeii. The explosion blew the center of the island clean out, creating the massive sea-filled caldera we see today. It buried Akrotiri under a thick blanket of ash, preserving it like a Bronze Age Pompeii. The blast would have triggered colossal tsunamis that raced across the Aegean, slamming into the coast of Crete, the heart of the Minoan civilization. The waves would have obliterated their fleet, wiped out coastal towns, and poisoned farmland with salt. Here we have a real historical event that mirrors Plato's account, a sophisticated island culture devastated by a natural disaster. The theory is that the memory of this terrifying event was passed down for over 1,000 years, first by the Egyptians and then to the Greeks. Along the way, the details got warped. The timeline stretched from about 200 years to 9,000, and the location moved from the Aegean to the mysterious Atlantic. Some even argue there was a translation error, and Plato's source meant 900 years, not 9,000, which would line up much better. Still, the Minoan theory isn't a perfect fit. Plato was very specific about the location, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and the Minoan civilization didn't completely vanish overnight after the eruption. It limped on for another century or two before finally being overrun by invaders. The connection is tantalizing, but it's not a slam dunk. And for those who believe Plato meant what he said, the search had to move to the place he named, the Atlantic. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, searching the Atlantic. The idea of Atlantis as a literal continent in the Atlantic was mostly forgotten until 1882. That year, a former US congressman named Ignatius Donnelly published a book that changed everything. Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Donnelly wasn't a scientist, but he argued passionately that Plato's story was literal history. He claimed Atlantis was the mother of all civilizations, and that cultures like the Egyptians and Mayans got all their knowledge, from pyramid building to metallurgy, from this one lost source. His book was a smash hit, tapping into a public fascination with lost golden ages. It single-handedly revived the search for Atlantis and framed it as a hunt for a lost super-civilization. Suddenly, people were looking everywhere for it, proposing locations from the Azores to the Canary Islands. One of the most famous candidates from this era is the Bimini Road. Discovered in 1968 off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas, it immediately caused a stir. Lying in shallow, clear water are what look like massive rectangular limestone blocks arranged in a neat line for nearly half a mile. To the divers who found it, it looked like a giant's pavement or the foundation of a huge wall. The timing was also perfect. A famous psychic, Edgar Cayce, had predicted that evidence for Atlantis would be found near Bimini in 1968 or 69. For believers, this was it. Geologists, however, threw some cold water on the theory. After studying the formation, they concluded the Bimini Road is a completely natural phenomenon. The blocks are made of beach rock, which naturally fractures into straight lines and blocky shapes that just happen to look man-made. Radiocarbon dating of shells inside the rock shows it's only about 3,500 years old, far, far too young to be part of Plato's ancient empire. Despite the overwhelming scientific evidence that it's natural, the Bimini Road remains a pilgrimage site for Atlantis hunters. With dead ends in the Atlantic, some researchers took a fresh look not at Plato's location, but at the shape of the city he described. The Spanish Connection. The city in the mudflats. For decades, the search was all about finding a sunken island. But what if the ruins weren't in the ocean at all, but buried under something else? This question led a new wave of investigators to a surprising spot: the vast marshlands of Doñana National Park in southern Spain. This theory starts by rereading Plato's map. The park is located just outside the Strait of Gibraltar, literally just beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Thousands of years ago, this area wasn't a marsh, but a huge inland sea dotted with islands. Using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, various research teams have identified strange features hidden beneath the mud. They claim to have found evidence of large circular structures that perfectly match Plato's description of Atlantis's concentric rings. One group, a UK-based company called Merlin Burrows, made headlines in 2018, claiming they had definitive proof. They announced they had found not just the circular city, but the remains of ancient sea walls, towers, and even a temple, all matching Plato's account. They even claimed to have found samples of a strange greenish-blue coating on the ruins, which they argued was Plato's orichalcum. It's a detailed case, but it has been met with huge skepticism from mainstream archaeologists. Critics are quick to point out that this research was never published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, which is a crucial step for verifying extraordinary claims. They argue the ruins are likely natural formations or the remains of later Roman or Phoenician structures. In fact, some of the features that were identified as ancient towers turned out to be the foundations for modern research structures built in the 2000s. The Doñana theory is compelling, but without real, verifiable proof. The mystery of the marsh remains just that, a mystery. The fringe, Antarctica, and ancient aliens. From here, the story veers from historical debate into pure speculation. Some theories about Atlantis are so radical they push the legend to the absolute fringes of possibility. One of the most persistent fringe theories places Atlantis on the most hostile continent on Earth, Antarctica. This idea was popularized in the 1950s by a professor named Charles Hapgood, who proposed a geological theory called Earth crust displacement. He argued that the Earth's entire outer crust could suddenly shift, moving continents into new climates almost overnight. He suggested that 12,000 years ago, Antarctica was much farther north, in a temperate zone, where the advanced civilization of Atlantis flourished. Then, a sudden crustal shift violently moved the entire continent to the South Pole, burying the city under miles of ice. Hapgood's theory was proposed before our modern understanding of plate tectonics, which shows continents move incredibly slowly. Today, his ideas are almost universally rejected by geologists. And of course, no tour of Atlantis theories would be complete without talking about ancient astronauts. For proponents of this idea, the incredible advancements Plato described, the complex engineering, the mysterious metal, the global navy, can only be explained by extraterrestrial help. They suggest Atlantis was either founded by aliens or was given its technology by them. Its destruction, then, might have been the result of a cosmic war or some kind of alien technological disaster. While these theories are fun and fuel popular TV shows, they exist purely in the realm of speculation. There is no physical evidence for a pole shift, nor any artifacts suggesting alien contact in our ancient past. What these ideas really show is just how powerful the Atlantis myth is. It's become a blank canvas for our wildest ideas about lost worlds and hidden histories. The verdict: myth versus reality. So after all this searching, where does that leave us? The hard reality is that despite all the sonar scans, satellite images and expeditions, there is no definitive concrete proof that Atlantis ever existed. There are no undisputed ruins, no Atlantean artifacts in any museum. The overwhelming consensus among historians and scientists remains that Atlantis was a brilliant fictional creation by Plato, a powerful allegory about pride and the fall of empires. And yet, the search goes on. Why? Because the story of Atlantis speaks to something deep in us. It taps into our fascination with a lost golden age, the idea that a hidden, forgotten chapter of human history is just waiting to be found. The legend endures not because of the evidence, but because of the hope. Claims of new discoveries continue to pop up, often generating media hype about concentric ruins or mysterious metals. But so far, not one of these claims has held up to scientific scrutiny or peer review. Ultimately, the search for Atlantis hasn't been a total waste. In their quest for a lost city, explorers have pushed the boundaries of oceanography and underwater archaeology, leading to the genuine discovery of real sunken cities, like Thonis Heraclean in Egypt, even if they aren't Atlantis. In the end, it may not matter whether Atlantis was a real place or a fable. The lost city might be less of a physical location and more of a powerful idea. It's a story that reflects our greatest dreams and our deepest fears. The dream of a perfect society and the terror of losing it all in an instant. The enduring mystery of Atlantis tells us more about ourselves than it does about any city beneath the waves. It reveals our unending quest for knowledge and our profound hope that even after the worst catastrophe, a story can survive. But what do you think? Was Atlantis a real place destroyed by a cataclysm, a cautionary tale from a brilliant philosopher, or something else entirely? Let us know your theory in the comments below. And if you love diving into the world's greatest mysteries, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation.